to really explore the exposure correction. So if you had a red camera or a Sony or a C300 that also does log, basically over here on the left side here, you see this camera icon. That gets you into the camera raw data, or parameter changes. You can elect to go red default, or you can use the project settings. So if your whole project were done in log, you could set it all up. I'm going to just treat it, though, with this individual clip. I select clip mode under decoding, and you'll use version 2 of the red color science. And under gamma curve, you have multiple choices here. Select red log. And that then allows you to change the ISO. What I was trying to get to work yesterday was to get a better exposure for those lamps over the subject's head. And I was doing that by trying to lower the ISO. So changing exposure manually here. Let's try 100. So lowering the ISO gets you more access to the highlights. If you were outdoors and you had, one of you had a shot yesterday where a Buddhist monk is walking into broad daylight and everything was blown out. If that had been shot with a log file, all of that blown out, overexposed data could have been retrieved. And you could have done keyframe animation to change the exposure as it goes. As this monk walked from shadow into broad light. I would have elected in that situation to take log, select the log in the camera raw, then enable a lower ISO to bring down those highlights. As it stands now, we got a little more data in here. I'm going to reset that node so I don't have a grade on it. And then what's helpful with log is your curve editor becomes more powerful. You can really get into sculpting the highlights. So I can get more data there, and I can stretch things back up there or here. You can raise black density from the bottom of the curve. So anyway, the idea of log is, raw is a different concept than log. Raw is a file format. Log is a characteristic curve of the brightness. Linear is a straight line from shadow to highlight in a straight line. Log is a slope that gives you more transitions in the shadow and in the highlight. So you get, especially where you need it, is far more choices in the shadow portion and in the highlight portion. So log was, it was brought in by Eastman Kodak, for example, when at the beginning of the digital cinema transition, when people would shoot in film, scan to a digital file, Kodak's scanning service was called Cineon, and they would put a Cineon log file on, and they would have a bit depth of 16 or higher bit depth. So, and that was because in that time the computers weren't that good. You couldn't get a lot of rapid data processing. So it was an accommodation to the state of computer power in that time. Cineon is gone, Kodak's gone, and all these Sony camera and the Red camera and the Canon have all adapted to much more quicker and robust computers. So log isn't as much in fashion in the post-production world, but in the acquisition, log is still a great way to go. RAW is nice. RAW, it's cumbersome in that you have to transcode your RAW file into a proxy to work with some editors. However, I believe Premiere, anybody editing with Premiere with R3D files? I'm not going to hype this red stuff. Let's talk about lookup table, because Red didn't give us a lookup table here, but this is a TIFF file I made from these, and we could apply a lookup table to this. Maybe I should turn off my text there. Okay. So on the node, if you click on the node, right-click, and go down, there is something here that says no LUT, 1D input LUT, 1D output, and 3D LUT. 3D LUTs are interesting. You can elect the LUTs for various cameras. Blackmagic's, Sony, that underwater shot over there is from a documentary I did that's currently on Chinese television. And we found that the LUT for the ARRI made their Sony camera and their Red camera look pretty good. So let's try that now. Let's apply the ARRI Alexa log C to Rec 709 LUT. Not so good on this one. Let's try a different LUT. See, this is already a Rec 709 still. I'll tell you what, I'll go back to the Red file. I'll turn that ISO back to 800. So we're in log here. We're fairly, log has these elevated shadows, and it's compressed down the highlights. So log tries to keep you in, if this is a football field, 0 to 100, it tries to keep you in 20 and 80. Now, a LUT on top of that could be interesting. Let's try a Sony LUT, Sony camera LUT. We'll take log 3 gamma to log C 709. Yeah, it's a little overdone. So my feeling is a LUT is sort of a shortcut. And in many times it's going to work, but in not every time, and that's why you need to learn to grade. So starting with this file, it's currently in its log. I would simply use my own eyeballs and measuring my scope and not trust the LUT, or well, you can trust the LUT, but I wouldn't employ the LUT. Don't use log. I would dial down black this way. So I don't compress black. I would try to get a little more highlight information. Those top lines to clip. But those lamps are never going to come back, not with a primary correction. My last resort with that would be the highlight control on page 2 of the primary corrector. HL is highlight. That gives me just a little more stretch there. So I would rather do that than a LUT. However, I'm not opposed to you using LUTs, and particularly if you are a documentary filmmaker, you're out in the field, you've just captured something, you want to put it up on Reuters or BBC overnight. You just captured a major political event in Hong Kong or Istanbul. It's got to go on the air. That's what LUTs are for. Various LUTs can do things. You can convert linear to log, log to linear. It could take what you have and make it Rec 709. Try it. If it looks good. I noticed that some of us were getting stills that you would put your still in the still store, and then when you do wipe, you had a digital noisy still. Were you all able to overcome that? It happens to be a problem with where the gallery puts its stills. So now let me show you. I think the configuration I wrote for you did not necessarily send that in the right place. Click on, when you have your project, click on the settings, go to General Options, scroll down to the Working Folders, and your cache files. What's cache? That's sort of a short-term memory. So if you are doing a shot that has lots of processor power, you can store in cache some of those processes. Some of you were doing tracking and interesting secondary work. Going to cache memory would have made your shot play at real time. So assign cache to be a folder on the hard drive that you are working with. Make sure it's going to, you hit the browser here and put it on the mainframe, the Macintosh HD. Add a folder in there. You can call it Resolve, Resolve Cache, and Stills, or Gallery. Let's call it Gallery. And hit OK. Okay, I didn't write to that. At any rate, it should go, the cache should go to the volume of the Macintosh, the device you're working with in the other room. Gallery stills should also be on that. So open up the Mac, go to the user. All right, go to the Mac. I'll put it on the Mac. Okay, so I'm getting that it doesn't like the write permissions. So the idea is the still that you make has to live somewhere, and it has to be on either the drive of the computer you're working with or the portable drive that you're working with in your session. Okay, does not have permission on cache and gallery. Okay, did not like those choices I made. Let's try that again. Settings. General Options. Scroll down to Working Folders. Browse. Users. DVR. I think it'll write to this. So under in this case, this DVR, I'm going to add a new folder called Resolve Gallery and Cache. And now for the gallery stills, I'm going to select that same folder. And it'll ask me to confirm that. Okay, once again, I will exit the application. And I'll relaunch the application to see if the devices have shaken hands. When you are doing your color corrections and you needed to do a split screen, you're trying to do a split screen between two grades, you will want to have a still in the gallery to do that. All right, so that has let me open up It didn't give me an error message. I'm going to put up a still, play it, and wow, oh, that's because that's on my old project. How about this? Okay, these are my power stills. Okay, so now I'm able to play stills. Right. So as you're working, and in the interface you have up here in the top left, you have the gallery tab. So make sure the gallery tab is on so you have access to both stills and memories. The stills are in this. You can add multiple stills. So if you want to have, like this is stills for some of the looks that I developed. These are stills from a different project that I worked on. Power grade is a still store that lives in your system. And then if you were to close your project and open up another project, you could retrieve a grade from that project and put it in any project. In my power grade is usually where I keep my template. Well, let's create a node template. Okay, so correcting some of our work yesterday is getting access to your stills, storing them properly. You would you can create a new still album. You can then Option-Command-G, store a still. These are memories. Clicking that button in the upper left gives you the Memories tab. Think of the memories as temporary. You know, short term, let's put this up here, let's do something else and compare it. But stills, if you really want to start getting close to buying or confirming a grade, then start using the stills for that. Particularly then you can do split screens. So I can right-click on a still, play the still, look at the grade, and then I can wipe, either use the wipe bar or you have, this will slide here. The icon here in the lower left, these gives you various selectors. So it can give you the image wipe, the qualifier, power windows, dust removal. Dust removal is very fascinating. I've been restoring some films that were done 40 years ago, and I'm just learning how to use dust removal. It's a very nice tool. So this time I'm selecting the image wipe, and then I can wipe between stills. Okay, so one more tool I want to have is a node template. The idea of the nodes is that's your corrector. It has an input, it has an output. And these threads connect these. If you don't have one, you can do anything to these trackballs and nothing is going to, you will not see color correction because you don't have a node connected. This button up here gives you the node window. So to get a node to start with, in most cases, once you launch a project and you put media in here, DaVinci will apply a serial node immediately. But if you don't see one, you can go into nodes and add a serial node. Now we have something that can take a grade. I'm going to reset that. Oh, I seem to remember I left a LUT in my color management. I want to get that LUT out of there. Say goodbye to this LUT. I tend not to use LUTs in the overall system, so I can remember having access. All right, so node structure, I would always need at least one node, and you don't have to label them, but I like to label them so I know what I'm doing, and I can tell my client what I'm doing. But I like to have multiple nodes, so I'm going to use Option S to add an additional serial node. Now, all these hotkeys I'm telling you about, they're all up in here. So it might be, I know some of you wanted to get out your cameras and we're going to take screen captures. You can do Shift Option 3, Shift Command 3, and you can get a screenshot on your laptop. So all those hotkeys, you could get screen captures that then list those. So if that's helpful for you to have that off on the side. Otherwise, you can find your hotkey menus by scrolling down. So what I did, okay, I want to get my workspace back. Turn off the screen capture. Relaunch the app. So once again, I added a node there. I'm going to teach you what layer nodes and splitter nodes and parallel nodes do. That's when things get kind of exciting and interesting. In the second node, this is entirely my own organization thing, but I put a secondary color correction on node number 2. And we're going to get into talking about these additional enhancements now. My third is where I put shapes. Oops, I don't spell very good. I like a fourth node, Option S. The fourth node is where I have my curve editor as sort of, downstream from these other. It's concatenated, so what happens on 1 affects everything downstream. What happens on 4 does not change what happens on 1, 2, or 3. I then like also auxiliary nodes where I might adjust saturation. When I work with Ruby, this is where Ruby and I kind of negotiate. Okay, Gary, give me more saturation. Okay, Ruby, here's 5. Show me 10. Here's 10. Give me 7. And it's a way to help the filmmaker and the colorist communicate and come to decisions. And we'll talk about that in how to talk to a colorist later. Sometimes I add a trim node, or I usually keep a separate node on the back end here for noise reduction, NR. And the last on the line I call my trim node. Sometimes I'll go through without a client and I'll prepare a first draft of the whole film. And then when we meet and discuss changing the film, we work on the trim node. And whatever change I make on the trim node, I can turn on and off. And the client can then see, how did it used to be? And I can show this is your first grade. What's it look like now? This is your second grade. And then I turn the trim back on. And then, okay, let's split the difference. Give me a 5. Give me a 10. So I call this my template. Now, I'm going to store that in the power grade. And I'll label that node template. So that node template, the next project I work on, I could retrieve it from the power grade store, and I could put it up in the temporary memory on memory A here. Then I can go to my timeline. Say I brought in my film. And I could highlight the entire timeline. I do this sometimes. I've got a show with 1,000 edits in it. I don't want to have to build a node template or a node structure every time I work on a shot. So I select the entire timeline. I go up to my memory 1. I right-click, and I press Apply Grade. And now every shot in the movie has a starting point, a node template. The technical grade I do first, primarily using my first node, primary node, to do an exposure correction for like a white balance, or to give myself more data, get shadowy information in white, and a basic contrast on it. And then round 1, I go through a film and
and that will be in secondaries.
That's in secondaries, curves, shapes, noise reduction, focus, stabilization, and effects. But round 1, you could go through the whole film with just the first node, that primary node, and do a basic grade, and you could be done. You could stop there. What I have done with this Matahari documentary I've worked on is the director has not decided yet on the various look treatments I've offered. So I've created this structure, and I'm on that first node is my basic correction, exposure correction, and balance, white balance. So if they don't like everything I've done on the rest of the chain, I can turn that all off. And I've got a basic start, the technical grade on node 1. Node 2, I get into secondaries. And that's still kind of color correcting. That's not stylization yet. In that film, there's some hot lights that have a color taint to them. They're to look like candlelight. And after the primary grade, most of the scene looks correct. That light source is not color correct. It is a blue light. So I've done a secondary correction to correct that light. So I'm still in technical grade at that point. Third node is that shape. I put a vignette on the whole movie. That's style. Because it's about a subject of 1917, I'm trying to make it look like what a lens might have looked like in 1917. Node number 4, the curve editor, I put a little extra crunch in the shadow to make more filmic like what film, like panchromatic black and white film of that era would have looked like. It wasn't great film yet. It had not a lot of subtlety in the shadow. So the curve edit then, I'm uncorrecting my technical correction. I'm putting a style on my 4th node that does not affect my 1st node. So if the client doesn't like what I did with my vignette, I can turn my vignette off on 3. 2 was a technical grade. I'm keeping that. But I might have put a secondary color correction for the skin tone. That is subjective, a stylist. Anyway, so technical grade first, node 1, possibly a node 2, using secondaries as technical. Styling after that, turn those things off. If they bought everything, if they liked everything I did, but just said, could I have the whole thing just a little more saturated? The trim node on the tail end is for that. Noise reduction is before the trim node because noise reduction is very processor intensive. If you elect to do that, you really start slowing down. I always leave that off till the very end. Yeah. So it's isolated. I can disable it. Okay, now let's try. Red output, let's not lower the green. Let's increase red output on the red channel. Let's increase red output on the green channel. And red output on the blue channel. Let's decrease green output on the green channel. let's subtract blue here. We're getting a little closer. So that would be a technical primary. Each channel has all three of the channels in it. So this is this is a mixer. So it's taking all three red, green, blue channels, and in the red channel, it's mixing the ratio of the red, green, and blue in the red channel, red, green, and blue in the green channel, red, green, and blue in the blue channel. So you could turn each of these into entirely just, I'll save my work here, memory 2. Oh, hello, memory 2. Okay, memory 2. Let's null that, reset. Okay, so I could make red channel just a red. No green. But things get a little weird. So right now I've canceled out the mixing function of the three channels. So my red channel is only red. My green is only green, blue. I have this overmodulation of red. Maybe I'll dial red back to neutral. Maybe I'll dial the green back to neutral. And blue back to neutral. So anyway, it's the idea is to use it as a bit like an audio mixer. There's additional work to do. I might add a secondary here. Not secondary, primary. And I then stack these so I know my functions here. So let's clean up my graph. Clean up node graph. All right, and that node that I last made, I want to put here. So I'm stacking this. So what I'm doing in primaries are all kind of lined up here. On this one, then I might choose to use the primary bars. Let's get a scope up. And I'm going to black balance, lifting red, on lift, adjusting green, just trying to get the bottoms of these waveforms to be lining up at the bottom to get a kind of a black balance. Then I may bring down the Y, the luminance. I'm moving this over here, just the Y only in lift. So I'm just doing that so I'm not contaminating colors in there and losing that black balance I just did. Now I'm going to go to gamma, which is where actually I'm going to go to gain, where the highlights are. And I'm going to try to lift the red here, see if I can get closer to normal skin tones. White balancing. The bride's dress is theoretically white here. All right, so I've leveled the peaks of the RGB in the parade monitor. Now I'm going on gain. I'm going to take the luminance only portion and I'm going to raise that and all three channels will come together. So now on node number 8, it's my second primary, I've got a little closer to a technical balance on that. But I don't like the color of the water, or my client doesn't like the color of water. Welcome to secondaries. Secondary is where we qualify independent colors. You do it on the one that you labeled secondary. So click on the secondary, put the eyedropper I'm trying to target the aqua. So I clicked, I selected that. You see in the icon over here, it's kind of highlighting it. To get the highlight on, press the keys Shift and H. That is a secondary color. It's within the whole sampling of color. You can sub-select. This is where DaVinci got very interesting. In our history in film grading, in the film laboratory days, we did not have secondary. You were not able to do this. When film to tape came along, and the first DaVinci in 1984 was used on a telecine, it had secondary color correction. You could take a color like this and change it. The world changed. Television advertising started doing fascinating, silly things. Music videos got very interesting because of secondary color correction. I have selected, I've qualified that. Okay, it's got our menu back up here. I qualified it based on hue. This hue is the primary qualification of it. So see this HSL? There are 3 parameters here: hue, saturation, and luminance. This bracket here indicates the hue width. So it selected a very narrow portion of cyan, basically 2 degrees there. Watch as I change the width to 10 degrees. It starts picking up white in all, or cyan in all sorts of other areas. Far more than I wanted. I'm going to do Command Z and undo what I did. I actually want to restrict this to fewer width sample or hue samples, so I'm going to assign a hue width of 1 degree. So it's narrow as I can do with the width. It has 2 degrees of softness. I'm going to make them 0 just for now to really kind of limit what's going on here. Now, what I would like is more pixel samples than that, and there are a couple of ways to do it. You can click on the eyedropper plus and swipe. And be careful, because you start swiping and you're getting, whoa, way too much. Wait, whoa, stop. Before long, you've got the whole thing. So go easy on that. I don't use that too much these days. So I like to start by a fairly restricted set of parameters. So I just limited width there. If you toggle this saturation now, you might get more pixel samples that way. Luminance, you could toggle luminance. You might get more of a range of luminance. What I find when I have to work fast, a more interesting way to expand that without using the brush is to use the clean white function. And slowly with the trackball, the wonderful trackball that the Institute has, the initiative has purchased for us, the 200 Hong Kong dollar version of a 29,000, this is all you need. You don't need this. Take that trackball and slowly expand clean white. So that's giving me more hue samples. This is a chroma key. So you're making a matte and a key. This is a key, and then you can blur the edges of that using the blur radius, and you can shrink the radius of the matte. And then now I've done that qualification. Now you can work with that as an independent color. Go back to your primary. Primary's over here, Gary. The hue knob that's over here, I'm going to change. So just to show you what's changing, So clearly I want maybe more pixel samples. So I'm going to expand. Okay, I'm going to turn on my highlight, Shift-H, highlight. I'm going to not swipe with the eyedropper, but I'm just going to take the plus eyedropper and tap in here. And that got me a little more. And you can see over on screen right here, I wish I had that too, so I go Shift-H. And then I click there. Now I have a secondary. I got the shark too. Now, when I talk about, you're filming and you have a Macbeth chart, and that chart is a great record of reflecting surfaces. If you didn't have a Macbeth here, a shark is a very good Macbeth chart. It is a great color. It is not a shiny surface. It has, if you put an eyedropper on it, it is a measurement of it's playing 10 frames a second. Maybe cache memory will get that to give us 25 frames a second. So anyway, it's all very interactive. It gets all very weird. You see, we're getting some problems. We may need to track some things. It's kind of surreal. As the exposure changes, the bridesmaid dress has different reflections. So we may wish to do multiple secondaries. But let's go back to the mask menu. You have also clean black and black and white clip can also be modified. This is what clean black will do. It's taking out some of the signal in the bridesmaid's dress. Black clip coming up will probably not do much. White clip will do that. So not much is happening there. The other thing you can do to finesse is to feather the arc of the luminance. You have low soft and high soft of luminance, so you can feather out brightness. Perhaps more lower light samples will help. Appears not. Maybe higher luminance samples will help us. I don't think so. How about saturation? If we feather, this is pretty effective. You can feather out some of the low saturation. You can increase high saturation. You'll probably get more colors that maybe you don't want. Or you can expand the width of the arc. That seems to be helpful, expanding the width. I'm getting more pixel samples behind them. And maybe I want to soften the edges of that. Okay, it looks like I picked a lot more color there. I think that's maybe counter to what I wanted to do. Well, that's not so bad. So toggling off and on, off and on. So if you've done effects work and you have, some experience with chroma keys and that sort of thing, you're basically taking a subcolor, and then you can qualify how that light. It is a light. At PIXAR, we talked about relighting all these underwater scenes and things. So they attach shaders in the computer, and then while working with them, I said, well, that's what we need to do in color correction. We need to think of these colors as lights. So try to think of the color as a way to relight the shot. Another way to contain the mask is to confine it to a shape. within the key that I made, the secondary that I made, I could also turn on a power window so right now, the key is applied to the whole frame, but using the power window, I could invert it so it only works outside. See the groom, I'm canceling out the grade on the groom, or I can select that, I'll turn everything off. You know, maybe we didn't want to change the color of the seat, we just wanted to change the color of the floor. So we could put our shape there and expand the aspect of the shape sideways. Oh, not so far, not so far. Let's try 80 on aspect. Let's try 100 on aspect. And let's soften that so it feathers there. Now, turning that on and off. Okay, so here's the concept. I also want to continue to isolate this mask by having what I'm doing with secondary in just one area of the frame. So I can enable a window shape. That window shape is isolating it. You see down here this circle in a square? That means it's an outside window. This means it's an inside window. So now inside that shape, the secondary is functioning. I'm going to put this down here because I want the secondary to work at the bottom of the frame, but not at the top of the frame. Sometimes the keyboard is faster than the mouse, so I'm going to type in numbers on aspect. Like 75, how about 80? How about 100? I like that. Now soften, I want to soften the edge of that mask, maybe, come on. Orange box, activate. Soft, 10. That area is where the secondary is functioning. If I did not want the secondary to be happening here, I could add an additional circle. I could put it on that shape. I could then shrink it down to fit. And going to the bottom here, this is the activated circle. So I've got two circles. I have two shapes. The other shape I'm going to use as a holdout. So if I click here, I'm canceling the effect of the secondary window here, so it's not intruding in that shape. So I'm not changing the color of the gown in that area. Now, I'd like to do some other shapes and things like that, but I need another secondary node to do that. For example, I'd like to brighten the groom's face a little bit and add a little more warmth to the groom. The bride has some nice saturation in her color. I'd like to help him out a bit more. But I can't put another circle on this one because it's what is going through the circle. If I added another circle, it would do that to that frame too. I need to create over here an additional node. And again, this is just my practice. You don't have to do this, but I like to stack things. So I know my primary functions, primary nodes were over there, and we're going to have a stack of secondaries over here. And maybe I want to move things up. So here is an opportunity to do a new set of secondaries. Let's add that to the groom. And size. In this case, I am going to avail myself of this wonderfully expensive piece of equipment to get a little faster on what I'm doing here. That is the reason to maybe buy the cheaper version of this. Okay, so that is now qualified. Shift H, that tells me I can do something in there. I'm going to brighten that. And I'm going to feather the circle, the softness of this circle. And I'm going to shrink it down so it's maybe not so pronounced. To get that, to turn off the display of the, you click away from it, and then you can see what you're doing in there. So maybe I got it too bright, but I want to warm it up. All right, so we've attached a circle shape to an object. Does the object move? Why, yes, he does. There he goes. You walked out of your light. Please go back down. We're going to track him. Here is the tracker button. It's next to the power window button. You can identify a circle there. Turn on the tracker button over here, press play. Don't press play up here, it won't work. Press play in the tracker, and it ought to follow him. And sometimes it expands its shapes and things like that. So this may work for a little while until something moves in front of his face, maybe that fish. And maybe the fish will bring it back. Okay, so the lesson in that is it is attached to an object or a shape, but anything crossing it can counteract it. So what you have to do is then get into interactive keyframing. Have you done keyframing in other applications, and you kind of understand? Well, one thing you can do is divide the shot. Okay, so it's kind of effective to here. I might want to move the location. And rather than get it into complicated multiple tracking, I'm actually going to put a cut. Command L. No. How about Command Pipe? Yeah. And at this point, I'm going to turn off tracking. And I'm going to let that fish go. Wait a minute. Oh, because I've got all this interactive tracking. It's still attached to the clip. All right, I have made, okay, I'm going to cancel in the second clip. I will cancel I'll null the tracking. So on clip 2, just about before the fish comes, I go to the tracker, and I turn off all that interactive tracking. So tracking is now clear. Do you see I did that with this dialer here? That wiped out all the tracking. So going backwards, I should have tracking on clip 1. play back, going backwards. Yeah, so all that tracking data is still in here. And it tracks by these various parameters: pan, tilt, zoom, rotate, 3D. You can select which ones you like. If you don't want to have the zoom on, you can program what you want. You can also get into interactive mode and then start adding a bunch of keyframes if you wanted to keep that as a cut. But what I want to demonstrate here is I've got tracking on cut 1. And then when that fish comes in, I'm going to introduce a cut in the shot. Whoa. Oh, I've got my loop still on. Command, / loop is off. Okay. There's a lot to remember with it. It's a great tool, but it's a complicated interface, I think you noticed yesterday. Okay, fish is coming in, cut. Now, on this one, let's go to the cut point. Using the arrow key, I'm backing up 1 frame. That's where I want that track to be. I'm going to do a memory save at option 3, staying in memory. Now I'm going to go to the next cut. And I want to get that tracking point back to the same place. I'm going to see if pasting in the memory will do it. It didn't. So I'm going to manually shift the... Okay, what I can do is to find that placement, it didn't copy and paste. So I'm going to my power window, and I'm looking at certain parameters here, the pan and the tilt. It looks like pan is at 5190. Now, let's say pan's at 52, tilt's at 53 and a quarter. I go to the next frame. And I'm checking those parameters. They are saying the same number. All right, well, I'm just going to manually tilt that down. Okay. I'm going to hold that. I'm going to let the fish fly through. And now I'm going to I will start tracking at this point. Tracker on, beginning of that frame, and follow our subject. And oh boy, here comes another fish. Okay, so they didn't take his mask away. Okay, we're at the end of the tracking. I'm going to go to another parameter to see. So obviously that secondary window, it gets a little too broad in its track. So I want to keyframe the functioning of that. You see this aspect here? Let's move that and see if that number changes. So I'm playing the shot forward. I don't see those numbers changing. I'm watching here, I don't see that changing. So what I think although those were tracking functions, it seems to have imposed an aspect change in the mask. So now I'm going to show you keyframing. See, it's expanding them and contracting the shape of the power window. Let's get into animating the power window here. So it's not too bad right now. Let's introduce a keyframe. Up here under marks is the hotkey menu for keyframes. I'm going to take a picture of that because you will do a lot of keyframes, and a screen grab of that you'll want to have. In time, you will remember how to do this, but simply adding this option, rather command / I have introduced every node now has a keyframe in it. So we are now going to be able to dissolve between parameters. You want every one of those nodes to have the same keyframe. Because when you get into keyframe editing and then you've got a secondary on, you want everything to dissolve together. If your grading has a dissolve in it, these keyframes can get very cumbersome. So the idea here is I've got an A keyframe number 1, and then I'm getting out to here, and shape, that mask shape is changing. I'm going to add command back bracket. So that now is a dissolve to the second keyframe. So this B keyframe. So what I want to do is have that mask on our groom shrink, so it doesn't expand out. So is this any better? Let's turn off the mask indicator and then play through there. Okay, it can be better, as we say in show business. CBB could be better, but you can get into very careful adding keyframes and adjusting the shapes according to your heart's delight. So what I wanted to do is show you how to qualify. So we took the ocean water, and that became a secondary, and we treated it as secondary. Then we added a shape to further qualify that secondary. So in a sense, the bottom mat, we'll call that one secondary. When I put that one on his face, I crossed the line. That got into shapes. That was a shape correction. But what is inside the shape correction is essentially a secondary color correction, because I brightened his face and I warmed it up. So. Well, it's actually a primary, because I didn't qualify that skin tone with the qualifier. So it's a shape of a primary, right? I brightened his face and I warmed his face up using the primary controls. Those were done there. What was done with the water was done with the secondary page. But I used shapes in addition to do this.